I feel like you're spiting me. Do you think I took this job to spite you?
Man, he was good, wasn't he? Philip Seymour Hoffman won the Oscar for the title role in Truman Capote back in 2005. Overall, he's received 4 Academy Award nominations and 3 Tony nominations for theater. Today, medical examiners are set to perform an autopsy after an apparent drug overdose. Police say a friend found the actor's body yesterday in his apartment in Manhattan's West Village. Near his body, cops say that investigators found prescription drugs and at least 50 bags of heroin. 50. Sources say the needle was still in his arm. Fox News has also confirmed that investigators are trying to track down surveillance video from a bank near the actor's apartment there in the West Village. That's where a witness reportedly told cops that he saw a man he believed was Philip Seymour Hoffman buying drugs from 2 men earlier in that hour, or just a couple of hours earlier, I should say. That witness tells police that he saw Philip Seymour Hoffman withdraw large amounts of cash. That's a quote from an ATM. Meantime, hundreds of friends and family members and fans, for that matter, have gathered outside his apartment to mourn the actor's death in the heavy snow today. Fellow actors took to Twitter to remember the star. He had 3 children with his partner of 15 years and young children as well. Julie Banderas has the latest on the reaction. She's live in the West Village. Man, a lot of disturbing details coming out of there today, Julie.
Absolutely. We all heard about the needle in his arm. If that wasn't bad enough, the 50 glassines, which are essentially plastic bags that contain heroin, and also prescription medicine, which include drugs for anti-anxiety, muscle relaxants, and blood pressure meds. But I'm told by sources that that's just the tip of the iceberg. But his body, as you mentioned, discovered yesterday morning by a friend who grew concerned, apparently, after being unable to reach him after he failed to pick up his kids. His body was removed some 7 hours later in the evening. Hoffman is long known to have battled with addiction, which began as a teenager, in fact, but he did remain sober for over 20 years until last year when he reportedly checked into rehab for heroin abuse, his suspected cause of death. Among the many celebrities to express their sympathy on Twitter include recovering alcoholic Rob Lowe, who writes, "Philip Seymour Hoffman's sad, untimely passing has me angry. I want more great work from him!" Exclamation point. I want less destruction from drugs, alcohol. Also a statement from Julianne Moore, who says, and she, by the way, co-starred with Hoffman in Boogie Nights, Magnolia, and The Big Lebowski, said, "I feel so fortunate to have known and worked with the extraordinary Philip Seymour Hoffman, and I'm deeply saddened by his passing." In a statement, his family says, "We are devastated by the loss of our beloved Phil." By the way, Shep, he actually rented this 2-bedroom apartment after he and his partner of 15 years, with whom he shares 3 children, had separated back in October. They live in the family $4 million home a few blocks away. He rented this $10,000 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow, 10 a month. Julie, I was wondering about this video surveillance. They think they have him on tape buying the heroin.
Yeah, FoxNews.com has actually learned that he is seen on a surveillance video by an ATM machine withdrawing a large amount of cash. On that video, also seen 2 men apparently in the midst of a drug buy. We're still waiting to hear more about the surveillance video, but certainly painting a very grim picture just moments before his death.
No doubt. Julie Banderas in the West Village in Lower Manhattan on the west side. Thanks, Julie, very much. The possible drug transaction at the ATM, I mentioned that. A friend found him dead. Let's bring in Anna Yum. She's a criminal defense attorney. Anna, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Shep.
I'm most interested in what can potentially happen to a drug dealer who sells drugs to a man who then dies.
Right. Well, I think there's a number of factors here, Shep. I think it's really going to start with the investigation to see if we can identify the 2 alleged drug dealers who allegedly sold the heroin to Philip Seymour Hoffman. And what could potentially happen is if these men are identified, the issue is what can they be charged with? Can they be charged with actual selling of controlled substances? And also, can they be charged with something more serious, such as secondary manslaughter, which in common terms is known as involuntary manslaughter? Can their acts amount to criminal negligence, which means that they acted so recklessly that caused the death of another? And that's something that could be told depending upon how this investigation surfaces.
You mentioned recklessly. Back in 2012, it was Minneapolis, Minnesota, not New York, but in Minneapolis, a drug dealer was convicted of murder in the 3rd degree after something like this happened. And on top of that, we now know, having watched this and been reading up about this, that there's a very rough strain of heroin that's been going around that I'm told heroin addicts knew all about.
Right, right. My understanding based upon this case with Philip Seymour Hoffman is that there were ace of hearts or ace of spades, and that there was a very potent type of heroin that was found in his apartment when officers conducted a search. And that's another issue. With that in mind, Shep, though, I do want to add that it's very difficult to prove these types of drug-induced homicides because it has to go with causation. How do you prove that the actual drugs that he ingested were the ones that were sold to him by the drug dealers? And if anything, how else do you prove that the heroin in and of itself caused his death and not something else, perhaps a combination of drugs? And so that's why I think the toxicology report is going to be very crucial in this case.
And a Yum with us from San Diego. I think you're right about that, Anna. Thanks. Especially when you get the word that they found more than 50 bags of heroin in the apartment. How do you know what was just a horrible ending?